Hey, we are live with the MMA Vivisection for UFC Boston. Dominic Cruz versus TJ Dillashaw, bantamweight title fight on top of the card. I am your host, Zane Simon, with my co-host, Connor Rubish. We are here to do the MMA Vivisection. We were supposed to be joined by Dallas Winston as well, but I don't know. He got lost in the ether of the internet, and so it's just the two of us today. But that's all right. I'm feeling the vibes. I'm up on this card. I like this card despite all the changes it's gone through. And it should be a fun time to talk about. Oh, Connor's already dropped out for his requisite one drop per show minimum. And hopefully that got that out of the way real quick. Connor, what do you...
Yeah. At the start of the show, I got to drop out once every show. So now I've got it done with. Won't happen again for the next hour.
That's right. So what are your thoughts on this card?
Still pretty good considering. I mean, it must have been a hell of a card to start with. It's hard to even remember what the original lineup was now. But, man, there were some good fights on here to start with. Maximo Blanco, Luke Sanders should really be fun. Luke Sanders is a good addition to the UFC in general. Mm-hmm. Solid replacement for Dennis Bermudez. Should be a fun fight there. Who else has been replaced? Is Augusto Mendez out now?
Augusto Mendez is out. He's been replaced by Kyle Bochniak. Joey Gomez is in after Patrick Williams dropped out. Elvis Mutapcic is in after Abdul Karim Edilov dropped out. Mehdi Baghdad is in after who dropped out of that fight for Mehdi Baghdad to be in? Oh, that was Merbek Taisimov.
Oh man, that fight. That's so sad that that's not happening.
Yeah, so
main card's still intact.
Yep.
Prelims have been ravaged.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
It is, but you know what? All the guys they signed on the prelims are either UFC caliber or future UFC caliber fighters.
Yes.
So it's, for once, I would say, not for once, but for a late notice call-up session, they did a pretty damn good job filling out this card.
A couple of them are guys that I'm really excited to see after these fights, even if they don't do well on their short notice. Like, I'm glad to have Elvis Mutapcic in the UFC.
Yep.
I'm really glad to have Luke Sanders in the UFC. Augusto Mendez should be fun. Like, these are all great fights. It's unfortunate they have to come in so late notice and not be able to make their usual weight classes, many of them.
Yeah.
And it's probably unfortunate for a lot of the UFC roster that other guys who are already with the UFC didn't get offered these fights, but who knows how the matchmaking works in this organization?
Yeah, it is a mystery of we were talking about this before the show, but there's a lot of matchmaking that goes on where it's like, you know what? The UFC has a really good system. Honestly, they do. They put on a shitload of great fights, and their general way of matchmaking, which is really nice, is to find the two guys on the roster who have a similar level of experience in the UFC and put them in the toughest fight possible together and build guys up that way. And you always get, that way the guys who keep winning rise to the top. And it's a nice slow build. It gives guys a lot of leeway to start at the bottom and work their way to the top. Unlike other organizations that tend to really just heavily lean on name value, and you either create a name for yourself or you're always going to be a prelim fighter.
Yeah. Got a lot of people from CES on this, don't they? I guess that's the people who were in the Boston area.
Yeah, CES. And, to its credit, that East Coast fight scene, I've talked about it several times. It doesn't always produce a lot of pretty records, but it produces a lot of really seasoned, tough fighters.
Absolutely. And CES in particular has really stood out to me. Almost every time I see a really good prospect with a lot of actual seasoning on the regional circuit, it's often a guy who has competed at classic entertainment sports. They seem to have some good matchmaking going on there. So.
CES and Ring of Combat both. Yep. Guys who are coming through those systems are almost always battle tested.
We got CES, we got LFC, RFA, Tachi Palace, Ring of Combat. Those are like the really solid, reliable American regional promotions, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. So let's just dive into this card. It's a long one, so we got a lot to talk about here. Can't spend too much time fucking around. And our first bout of the night, a light heavyweight bout, Frantimar Barbosa versus Elvis Mutapcic. What are your thoughts on this fight?
I had to research. I had to research Francimar Barroso, so
That's a bad sign.
I'm already upset at him going in. Like I had to watch his fights to research for this, and which means I had to watch his fight with Jimmo. I had to watch his fight with Hans Stringer. Not fun.
Yeah,
So
it's
it's
a bad
probably,
sign when you have to research a guy who's been in the UFC for 3 fights and 3 years already.
and I don't have any clear picture in my head of what he does well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that just kind of right there sums up Francimar Barroso in a lot of ways. He's rugged. He's tough. He is a good first fight for a UFC debutant.
Mm-hmm.
So with the first opponent he was matched up with, it would have been great as a first fight for Elvis Mutapcic. Should be a decent introduction,
Yep.
especially because I think Mutapcic will probably be at middleweight.
Yeah,
Uh,
Mutapcic is basically a career middleweight.
yeah, so it's a better light heavyweight matchup than he could get. Good for him.
Mm-hmm.
Mutapcic, better counterpuncher, better combination striking, better top game. Not perfect takedown defense, but Barroso is not really a great takedown artist. I just don't really see a way where Mutapcic is outmatched in this fight. There's no phase where he's behind.
Yeah, it's about where if Bahosa can just hulk him against the fence for round after round, just by being bigger. I mean, because Bahosa, he's not that tall, but he is a huge light heavyweight. He's one of those dudes that has made a career out of being bigger and tougher than his opponents. And so if he can just like lean on Mutapcic, I could see him getting just one of those ugly, god awful, dreadful wins. But Mutapcic is a really solid, seasoned talent.
Yeah.
Like if you're not, great wrestlers can outwork him, but that's about it. Like over his career, he does not lose a lot, and he's a very solid combination striker, a decent defensive striker too. Like he recently, if you've watched his recent fights, he started moving really well in the pocket. He's become a very
Yeah.
comfortable pocket puncher.
Good efficient head movement. He had trouble in his fight with Kelvin Tiller, which is actually a great fight you can find on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube. He had trouble with the striking of Kelvin Tiller in that, but Tiller is a pretty sneaky kind of throwing a lot of weird lead rights and odd pot shots with weird timing, and then he just out wrestled Tiller and worked him on the ground.
Yeah,
So it just shows how well rounded he is. Where if one phase isn't working, he has others to fall back on.
and I mean, and a lot I think too of why he might have had some trouble with Tiller too is the Elvis's biggest drawbacks are that his reach is short for how tall he is, so he has to be in the pocket, and Tiller is really long and was able to just kind of pick at him from the outside as Mutapcic was trying to move into range.
Mm.
And that because he's very high output in the pocket, I mean, we know high output guys get hit. Like,
Yep.
that's just something that happens. If you're going to sit in the pocket and throw a lot of strikes, you're going to get hit.
Yeah.
But Mutapcic, he's a better wrestler. He's probably a better grappler. He's a better striker than Barroso. It's just a matter of short notice and being smaller in this fight, honestly.
And I think Mutapcic, like a lot of the guys coming out of CES for this, were preparing for a card coming up. I think
Yeah.
so. He's got a little bit of training under his belt. He should be in decent shape.
Yeah, and he's an old school dude. I think he's one of those dudes that's always in the gym, always training, always in shape. Great cardio. I expect a good win out of him here. Maybe a bad first round, but like take over late, kind of second and third. He is the favorite.
Some of that Francimar Barroso magic could rub off on him. You never know.
Yeah. Mutapcic is the favorite, minus 150 up to minus 175. Barroso, the underdog, plus 148 down to plus 120. Especially on short notice, those odds make good sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
That brings us to a bantamweight bout. Rob Font, Joey Gomez. This is a real coin flip fight for me, frankly. I think Font, I think Font is a more well-rounded fighter. He kickboxes more than just boxes. He's a willing grappler and wrestler if the opportunity opens up for him. And he's a good power puncher. Packs a heavy hit, is consistent. Actually a pretty decent defensive fighter for as crappy as his footwork is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he does a good job not getting hit, and staying controlled. I remember him going into that fight with George Roop, and I was just like, "Oh man, George Roop, this is exactly the wrong fight for George Roop." And
It
yeah,
was.
it was. And the thing is that Joey Gomez is kind of a more limited version of the same fighter. Like he is also a pretty decent defensive fighter, not amazing, but not bad. Uh, has big power in his hands. Really only boxes, but is a very like he really benefits a lot from having that funky sort of Conor McGregor frame where he just has huge arms that are and hands that are way outsized for his body.
Mhm.
And because of that, even when he's not throwing with a lot of power, he just seems to hit really, really hard.
Do you think there is some connection between hand size and power? It seems like it shouldn't matter because we know that power doesn't come from your hands and that the weight of your hand shouldn't matter that much. But it does seem like Matt Mitrione has
Yeah.
massive hands. Conor McGregor has huge hands. Joey Gomez, really big, freakishly large hands for his body size.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, honestly, I think it's one of those things like it can't there has to be some mechanics that go with it. Like
Yeah,
there's no substitute for mechanics when it comes to power.
sure.
But if you have just those freakishly long arms with big hands on the end of them and you have good mechanics, it I think it makes a big difference.
Ernie Shavers had gigantic hands, if I'm told correctly. So one of the hardest punchers in boxing history. So
Yeah,
there's something to it.
I really think there is. I mean, we also I think maybe too if you just have big strong hands like you put more trust in them because if you
Yeah,
have more delicate hands like you know that they're probably gonna break like you can tell like I think there's honestly a difference with structure like
that makes sense. Maybe just your hands are strong enough to just feel confident throwing them at anything with full power.
yeah.
Big
Eh,
wrists, big knuckles.
so Joey Gomez he seems to just have that natural power that really even when he's not doing everything. Even when he's just snapping something out there, it just seems to crumple guys.
Hmm.
So this fight, I don't know. It's kind of a toss up to me because I get the feeling it's probably mostly going to be a firefight on the feet, and the first guy that really starts to connect cleanly is gonna win. And I might lean towards Rob Font in that because he's more practiced. He's coming in on a shorter or on a longer or better notice with a UFC level camp, but he's also been injured for a long time. He's been out for a long time. And Gomez is, he comes out with a long amateur history under his belt. He's a former Marine. I could easily see him just being one of those guys that's always in the gym, always ready to go, performs well on short notice kind of guy. I'm gonna lean Rob Font, but just barely.
Yeah, I think the injury layoff is the thing that really makes me wonder about how this fight might play out. Because normally, I think with these two guys, with their relative experience levels, I would pick Rob Font without too much difficulty. I think he's a little more well-rounded, a little more willing to grapple and to force the
Mhm.
grappling. Gomez is a nice reactive grappler, but not necessarily a great defensive wrestler. And Font can hit nice takedowns, covers distance really quickly with his strikes and his takedowns. Gomez is really dangerous though because he is that kind of fighter who a rare breed of fighter who hits with tremendous power and does not have to engage with you to deliver that power. He's a boxer
Yeah.
who hits hard. He's like a Klitschko type where he's got this
Mhm.
long build and he's willing and knowledgeable enough to use it, keeps a good jab out there. Rarely does he have to throw anything more than one or two punches, but he really, really demands respect when he connects. And problem for Gomez is there are question marks due to his experience. Despite coming out of organizations with good matchmaking, he is fighting the kind of guys that somebody who has only 6 fights should be fighting.
Yep.
So he's not faced the same kind of competition as Font, and he's never been out of the first round. So we really have a lot more question marks about him. Font is pretty good at fighting long and tall fighters like George Roop, Tristan Johnson before Roop, and is well-rounded, submission threat, knockout threat, and he's gone the distance many times. So I think it's just a lot easier to rely on Rob Font. But like you, I wouldn't be surprised if Joey Gomez had a great debut.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this fight ended in the first round. Both guys have a history of having a good chin, but I don't know. Like, I don't know how many punches they've faced like each other.
Yeah, and if Rob Font's chasing after Gomez and Gomez counters him, Like the way he lunged in on George Roop.
Hmm.
You can deliver a hard punch that way, but you're going to eat a hard punch twice as hard as it was intended running into it like that. So
Yeah, and I mean, because Roop is a known. He has a known hole with hard punchers that are willing to come in on him
yeah,
and work inside in the pocket. Like that is poison to George Roop.
yeah.
So that doesn't seem to be so much the problem for Joey Gomez. Next up, odds on that fight. Roop Font is the favorite, -200 up to -235. Gomez the underdog, +196 down to +160. I mean, it's not too it's not too far apart, but I feel like this is a real coin flip. I feel like it's
I'm
just
okay with those odds, but they do feel a little wide.
yeah. Next up, light heavyweight bout: Ilir Latifi, Sean O'Connell.
Fun fight. Two light heavyweight matchups on the same card. When's the last time we've seen this?
No.
4 of the 8 light heavyweights in the UFC are fighting this weekend.
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
it's a good fight actually. I think this is a really solid matchup. All of these guys are eventually going to be like tests for the only real prospect in the division, Corey Anderson, to fight sometime in the future. So the way I see it, they're just priming people for Corey Anderson to test himself against because he's got real potential. Ilir Latifi, dangerous for a lot of reasons, pretty fast, despite looking like he is made of cobblestones, like a little golem. He's pretty quick, on his feet, and he is as strong as he looks. He's
Yeah.
a workhorse in the clinch. He's got that Johnny Hendricks kind of upper body strength. Works really well with his Greco background. On the ground, I remember when he submitted Cyril Giabate, I don't think he even had the guillotine under Giabate's throat. Like he just about popped his head off, and Giabate had to tap, and that's what Ilir Latifi does. He's incredibly powerful. Sean O'Connell, not nearly as powerful, uh, much more singular in his style, but dangerous in his own right. The thing with Sean O'Connell is that he can soak up a hell of a lot of damage, and he knows no way but forward. He is always coming forward, no matter what. It gets him into trouble because he doesn't really know how to change up his rhythm all that much. He kind of just comes in this predictable pace, but that pace never slows, and he never stops doing it. So against a fighter who's prone to wilting or one who is fragile, that can be a real difficulty for them. Against Ilir Latifi, I'm not sure that it'll work. I think Latifi's too strong in the clinch, and we know Sean's going to wind up in the clinch. And I think Latifi is a good enough striker to lace Sean with some counter punches on the way in. So it's Ilir Latifi by decision, but he could knock him out.
By decision, really? I
Yeah.
have to pick him for the KO.
I don't think he's that great of a striker. That's the thing. And Sean O'Connell's
No.
durable, He's very durable. And Ryan Jimmo really is truly a good counterpuncher when he actually lets his hands go. That's the only time that we've seen Sean go out in the UFC.
It's true, but O'Connell, like, he has a style that is really like, basically, if he were anything but a light heavyweight or a heavyweight, he would not survive. Like, with the way he fights, because he is I will come in with my chin up, my head on line, and I will throw both hands at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's up to you to stop me.
Yeah.
And like that is, I think mostly the thing is that he just never faces dangerous enough strikers to actually take advantage of that.
That's
like
true.
you look at his record, and he's been knocked out twice only. But none of the guys on his record, other than Marvin Eastman in 2013, are at all recognizable. And, John Vellante, we know, is just such a hit or miss fighter.
Yeah.
And Jimmo is too. But in that fight, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like watching us, it's like, okay, O'Connell's getting knocked out. We know O'Connell's getting knocked out. We can see this, and then he gets knocked out. Like he kept coming in the same way, head up, chin out, both hands, no defense. And Ilir Latifi's not some punching master, but he does hit really, really hard. and he's good enough at finding your chin if you're just gonna run at him.
Probably, yeah. That's why I said maybe a KO. I even had to acknowledge
Yeah,
it. I already said unanimous decision on my Shirt Hug preview,
it's true.
so
You
I'm just
can't
gonna
back
stick
off it
with it.
now.
I'm just gonna ride that one home. That's fine. I'll look
Yeah,
really smart if he doesn't knock him out, but I see where you're coming from.
yeah. O'Connell is one of those guys. I have all respect for him because he seems like a decent dude. I know he was written a couple books and stuff, and
Like bizarre urban fantasies, according to Jordan Breen.
yeah, like these super bizarre urban fantasies. He seems like a cool guy. Whatever. Like I got respect for him, but his style is. It's like Fabio Maldonado without the nuance.
Oh, ooh, I hope he doesn't watch this because he's going to be hurt if he hears that. That
I
is
feel
not.
I feel bad for saying it. I
Well,
do.
no, he's like Maldonado with different dimensions. Like he's Maldonado without the hand speed and the jab, but Maldonado with clinch fighting and with cage control and stuff. Maldonado has
Yeah,
no idea what to do in the cage.
it's true.
Sean O'Connell at least knows that. He just has no gears. Like it's like a steady three all the way, just
Yeah,
rolling after you, and that's a problem against a guy who can change speeds and looks and angles quickly like Latifi. Even if he's not really well schooled, he's fast and powerful.
yeah. I mean, Latifi, for his flaws and his size and the weird choice, the weird cobbled to get, like, he is a super strange fighter. He's one
Mhm.
of the strangest fighters in the UFC, but he is also like a top 5, top 10 level athlete. You know, he's a incredibly good athlete. It's just that he's stringing together a Greco-Roman background in which is one of the strangest places to come from in terms of like skills into MMA,
Mhm.
and he's just he's fighting as a 5'10" light heavyweight, and that's a generous 5'10" as far as
Yeah,
I can tell.
yeah. It's kind of. I'm kind of. I'd be surprised if he really was 5'10".
So the odds on this fight: Ilir Latifi minus 250 to down to minus 310. Sean O'Connell plus 236, down to plus 200. That feels more or less right to me. I think that's even a little narrow.
Latifi fought Emmanuel Newton.
Yeah.
That's a fight I never knew I needed until I saw that in his record. That's a fight between two very weird light heavyweights.
Yeah. I mean, he also fought Blagoy Ivanov in his first pro fight, and the ring broke.
Oh, MMA.
I know.
No contest ring broke. 5 seconds into the first round. Oh, that's
Uh,
okay.
like I say, his record is really really fucking strange. Like
Mhm.
he's a strange fighter. He's one of the strangest. I think he's honestly probably the strongest fighter in the UFC.
He may be.
Um. All right, that brings us to featherweight: Charles Rosa versus Kyle Bochniak. This is a thrice changed fight for all involved. It's supposed to be Jimmy Hedis, Charles Rosa. Then it became Augusto Mendez, Charles Rosa, and now it's Kyle Bochniak, Charles Rosa. And well, I'm not gonna say it's a. Yeah, I mean this is probably the best iteration for Charles Rosa.
Yeah, I've been riding with him since the beginning too. I thought he was probably a little more dangerous and physically strong than Jimmy Hedis. He's
Yep,
more experienced and probably a little better in shape against Augusto Mendez. So I think that was maybe actually the most dangerous matchup
yep,
for him. And then we've got Kyle Bochniak, who's, you know, to my mind, the least impressive of the short notice pickups, and that makes sense because he's the latest. He
yep,
is actually fighting Rosa at featherweight, which I think is interesting because I think he normally fights as a featherweight.
yeah.
Um,
Bochniak, he's coming in his own division,
yeah, whereas like Mendez is normally a bantamweight, and he was going to fight Rosa at featherweight.
but Bochniak also fought last week.
That makes sense. So he's still down in weight, just has to
Yep,
cut water again. Bochniak is pretty rote. He comes forward, he's aggressive, he wants it, but there's not a lot of complexity to his game, whether in the wrestling or the striking. It's very kind of robotic. Rosa's not a smooth striker by any means, but he didn't look completely out of his depth with Sean Soriano, who is a much better striker than Bochniak. And on the ground, Bochniak in his fight with let's see, I saw his fight with Russo oh my God, why did I try to pronounce his name?
No.
Yashvili.
Yeah.
And he, got out grappled for significant portions of that fight. A lot of scrambles, stuff like that. Charles Rosa lives in that world. So if you give Charles Rosa a chance to scramble with you and you're not necessarily prepared and maybe not that experienced, which he's not, then I think you're going to end up in hot water. So Charles Rosa by submission for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my pick too. I mean, the big thing here is you basically have two good athletes who are MMA natives who came into this sport with no combat sports background whatsoever.
Does
And
Charles Rosa have no grappling background before
yeah, no, he
MMA?
was a hockey player, I
What?
believe.
That's insane. That's really impressive given how good he is on the ground.
Yeah,
Wow.
these are two MMA natives who are good athletes. They're both very good athletes, but that neither of them have a combat sports background. Neither of them have a singularly incredibly deep technical skill set. But Rosa's just more experienced at this point. And when you're talking about a matchup like this, I mean, you kind of got to go with the more experienced guy.
Mm-hmm. He's got some really, Rosa, thing is, he's a very high risk. Like, he has
Yeah,
no qualms about jumping on a crazy submission and abandoning a strong position on the ground. And that
yeah,
makes him a really high risk fighter and one that could probably be 3-0 in the UFC if he hadn't submitted Sean Soriano in his second fight. It was very close and he may
yep.
have been on his way to losing it. But he is genuinely very tricky on the ground. I
Oh yeah,
remember one point in the Soriano fight, he had back control and jumped on an arm-in guillotine from Soriano's back as Soriano thought he was about to stand up. He's very crafty with that kind of
yep.
stuff. I just don't think Bochniak is going to be ready for that.
No, I like Bochniak, good prospect, but this is probably just too much too soon for him. He's a good athlete and he's tough and he's aggressive, and that'll carry him a long way in the future. But it'll be off. It'll be a slow build.
Mm-hmm.
He reminds me a lot of the guy we just saw fight. Fucking oh damn it, Drew Dober, uh,
Okay.
Scott Holtzman.
Okay, yeah, I can see that comparison. Yes, definitely.
Basic same skill set there. So odds on this: Charles Rosa minus 285 and 273. Kyle Bochniak plus 205 and 217. Moving right along, Paul Felder, Darren Cruikshank at lightweight. Man, I gotta say I'm not feeling Darren Cruikshank these days. There was a point, and it was right off his back-to-back spinning KO head kick wins against Eric Koch and Mike Rio, where I thought he was really finding a groove. He'd lost to more powerful grappler and better boxer, frankly, in Adriano Martins, and he lost to a better boxer than John McDessie. And it felt like, okay, we've got this book on Darren Cruikshank. If you can box him up inside, you can beat him. And in general, Adriano Martins, John McDessie, Jorge Masvidal, KJ Noons, all dudes that could box him up inside. Lately, since then, it's like he's tried to counter that by being a more aggressive wrestler. And the more aggressive wrestling version of Darren Cruikshank is a very beatable fighter. Like, he's
Mm-hmm.
no longer an unpredictable fighter from the outside. He's now a fighter that's going to dive on a half decent takedown, and if he doesn't get it, end up in a scramble that he can't handle. And I don't have a lot of faith in that. Like, especially with Paul Felder being as big and powerful as he is. Paul Felder's not an awesome wrestler or counter wrestler, but Darren Cruikshank's not an awesome wrestler either. Like, he's not an awesome takedown machine. If Felder can shuck him, then he's going to have the chance to open up with big, powerful counter strikes as Cruikshank is starting to shoot, and I can see him hurting him there. And if it's from the outside and it's an exchange of wheel kicks, essentially, then Felder's the bigger, more powerful fighter there. So I got to take Felder here.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is great matchmaking actually for
Mm-hmm.
Felder because we've now seen him fall short against two more experienced fighters who are not necessarily 100% better than him technically. Because Paul
Yeah.
Felder I think he's still exactly as good as we thought he was going
Mm-hmm.
into his last two fights. All of us thought he was going to win those fights. Not all of us, but all of us thought the Edson Barboza fight was going to be close, and it was. We've seen
Yep.
how great Barboza's looked lately, so that's a very credible performance. Most of us thought he was going to lose to Ross or beat Ross Pearson, and he didn't. And the
Yep.
reason he lost both fights, I think, is that he is still pretty inexperienced. in professional MMA, and I think he gets a little too frustrated. And I think that was an issue for him in both of those fights. This is a great buildup for that because he's going to have a guy in front of him who is a threatening striker, who has a varied game with throw a lot of different things at him, like the last two guys did, but doesn't have the subtlety of an Edson Barboza or a Ross Pearson. Doesn't have the slick little footwork. Doesn't have the short little pivots and the sharp jabs. Doesn't have the head movement. Cruikshank is a big fighter. Everything he does is big. And I think, and high risk, high reward too. And I think that's why he started to look so good against Rio and then Coke. But you see him against everyone with like basically some level of subtlety or craft to their game, and he just can't keep up with them. John McDessie fight, the Adriano Martins fight, Jorge Masvidal, Beneil Dariush, everybody who has just a little more a cerebral element to their game can pretty much get over on Darren Cruikshank. And I think Paul Felder definitely has that. And hopefully he will view it as an opportunity, not just to get a win under his belt, but to work on his frustration issue and to work on dealing with somebody who's going to throw a lot at him while still being beatable. I think Paul Felder, I want to say Paul Felder by unanimous decision, and that's what I said the first time. But a knockout wouldn't surprise me, especially if Cruikshank goes for some silly takedown and eats a Felder knee because he has vicious step-in knees.
Yeah.
That seems a likely result, but or an uppercut, something like that. But Felder decision feels okay.
Yeah, I don't know that Cruikshank has a notably great chin, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the big thing here too to me is that kind of like we've seen with Cruikshank, Felder, his biggest problem is good inside boxing. Guys who can actually sit in front of him for more than one shot and pick at him a little. I mean, you know, Barboza's not the most amazing pocket striker, but he's grown a lot there. He's a much better than the average, much better.
He's a lot better than he used to be in that regard.
Yep.
And jumping in and out of the pocket, giving you things. Yeah,
yep.
I think Felder has also good pocket striking, and that's what Cruikshank, the McDessie fight, the Martins fight, that's given him trouble in the past.
Yeah, Cruikshank's not going to Cruikshank is not going to outwork him in the pocket because it's just never been where he's comfortable. He gets lost on long exchanges. And if it's just a battle of who's going to be outside and hit the best shots from the outside, they both can do it, but Felder's a bigger, stronger fighter, so
I'm going to check the prop bets and see if there's an over-under on how many spinning strikes are thrown in this fight.
There really should be. The odds on this have Felder favored minus 247 up to minus 295. Cruikshank, the underdog, plus 185 to plus 231. That feels about right to me, frankly. I think Felder's a reasonable favorite, and yeah, I would actually pick him to knock Cruikshank out. I just think that Cruikshank, even if he's losing by submission, I've seen him rocked in those submission losses, and obviously we've seen him knocked out. He got knocked out by Luis Palomino, and then on tough by what's his name, James Vick, on that step-in knee that could easily be imagined. Leads us. That's the Fight Pass card. Under the Fight Pass card, that leaves us to the Fox Sports 1 prelims and Maximo Blanco versus Luke Sanders.
Really like this matchup. Sanders is normally a bantamweight, stepping up to featherweight to fight Blanco. It's a tough UFC debut, and a tough one to predict because it's Maximo Blanco, who is just the weirdest fighter in this division. He's the dark horse for the featherweight division, except that dark horse implies that like they're going to succeed. You know what I mean? Like they're going to succeed and you won't see it coming.
He's an eternal dark horse.
Yeah, but you never see it coming when he succeeds, but he does it a lot, but you can never count on him to do it. Maximo Blanco has this weird issue where he just can't control himself in a fight. I think maybe he is like a savant. Like he honestly fights like he's on the autistic spectrum. And I don't mean to insult anybody by saying that, but it's like he doesn't have room in his head for strategy. He's like this intense focus on just what's happening in front of him. Sometimes that leads to him just doing nothing for long stretches of time. Like Blanco, you are so fast and so athletic and so good, have such a natural sense of distance, and you're just doing nothing. Other times, it leads him to just go berserk on somebody 2 times he has been DQ'd for kicking or kneeing a downed opponent when it is against the rules. I would like to imagine that Blanco just genuinely doesn't know the rules, the unified rules of MMA, because he trains in Japan. He floats around all over the place. Blanco is this generation's Gegard Mousasi. You know, he's just a guy who seems to have all this potential. And in the big leagues, it's like, dude, step up your training, do something. You got to make some kind of change. You have all this possibility. I don't know. Great transitional fighter. Love Maximo Blanco. Hate him at the same time. Luke Sanders, really fun, very aggressive. Another fighter out of my beloved MMA lab. I don't know why I've loved them so much lately, but I just think I've been really impressed with the fundamental skill sets I've seen from their fighters. The improvements Ben Henderson has made. Luke Sanders, I think, looks very much like an MMA lab fighter. He's good. He's aggressive. Um, he hits with relative power. He's got better than average defense, and he's a strong wrestler. Very difficult to take down. Strong in the clinch. Good scrambler on the ground. All the kind of things you would expect from that gym. It's hard to pick him here because I think he's going to be outsized, and I think Blanco, when he's on, he has this superhuman ability to judge distance and range and fight in transitions, in these like scrambles on the feet, as it were. But it's laughable to say that Maximo Blanco is the safe pick. You know what I mean? But whatever.
Yeah.
Maximo Blanco. I can't worry myself over this fight too much.
No, it's one of those things where like Blanco, it's the basically it's the version of he's like Diego Brandao 2.0. You
Kind
know?
of. You know, can I say it this way? I would be equally unsurprised if Blanco in the original matchup had beaten Dennis Bermudez
Hmm.
as if he lost to Luke Sanders.
Yeah,
Either one of those sounds completely fine to me. And
yeah,
I would you would tell me that result and I'd be like, oh yeah, that
because
happened.
he's probably the better wrestler, probably the better striker, maybe the better probably an equivalent grappler to Luke Sanders, but he is just. I mean, he's got the Melvin Gillard thing, which what I think it is, and I've seen this at you see it out of certain fighters. And I talked to at one point Caveman, what's his name, Dave Rickles about it because
Oh yeah.
he's the same way. Is that these guys they train everything so much and they get it so they're so involved in their training, they've done the sport so long and all that, everything is just reaction to them.
Yeah.
It's just I see the opening, I hit the opening. Like there's an opportunity, I am going to take that opportunity. And then their brain catches up to them 5 seconds later and they're like, oh shit, what was I doing? Like, you know.
I think like a really advanced version of that is Jose Aldo. I mean, Jose Aldo is
Yeah.
kind of the same way. He gets lost in the transitions and in the tactics of the fight. In the moment, he's seeing these openings, and he will lose his game plan sometimes trying to adapt to what's in front of him. But he's like so good, and he's got Andre Pederneiras in his corner.
Yeah.
Imagine Maximo Blanco with a Pederneiras or with a Greg Jackson or with a Rafael Cordero
Yep.
keeping his eye on the prize. He'd be incredible. But
Yeah, I mean these guys. There are coaches that know how to mold that. Greg Jackson is incredible. Like when Melvin Gillard was with Greg Jackson, and when Diego Brandao has been with Greg Jackson, they have been much better versions of the fighters they were before. Even if they don't win all the time, even if they still make mistakes, it's like a way lower number.
Mhm.
And Blanco's got that same thing. I mean, I doubt he means to throw an illegal knee. It's just like, okay, well, there's his head. It's at knee height. I'm going to hit it. And then a second later, it's like, oh, shit, why the fuck did I just do that?
Yeah.
You know? And it's people are like that. They, especially people, like I say, you train things enough. You train your body to react enough and you work enough. A lot of it's just muscle memory.
That's the thing,
And
though. I wonder if Blanco is still training that in the gym. Like he's still training knees to downed opponents
well, it's
because
not
he's
even
in
knees to down opponent. It's just like you spend all this time sparring, all this time working, and if you're not, if your idea is, if you're just a very reactive, like I'm going to feel the fight kind of fighter, then you're just going to train like everything's kind of free flow,
sure, but it's been 6 years, 5 years since he should have been training those specific
I
attacks.
well, I know. It's not like I say. I mean, talking to Dave Rickles, like he's never been in the environment where that was illegal, but he's still like, he's talking about it's like, yeah, it's happened in training, it's happened in the cage, like it just you get into a flow and you're just seeing the openings and your body's like, okay, I know what to do here. I see this opening, I'm gonna hit it, and it's not even a like, oh well, his hand is up or whatever. It's just you're not thinking about it at all.
The perils of being a natural fighter.
Yep. It's very much the perils of being a natural fighter. But and I gotta go with you. I gotta pick Blanco because he is a better athlete, or he's an equal athlete. He's a very very top 10. He's a top 10 level athlete when
And,
he's
and I think he's better in the ways that we don't tend to think of athleticism, like proprioception and balance, like those kinds of
yeah
things. He's not just explosive and fast, but he's better than most in the sport in those
yeah.
realms.
I mean when Maximo Blanco is on, he is an elite athlete, and he's a better wrestler. He's a better striker. Luke Sanders is not an amazing grappler. He's not some like absolute jiu-jitsu wizard. He's mostly a little fire plug of a dude who works constantly in an incredibly high cardio output. I could see Luke Sanders get outworking Maximo Blanco here, but Blanco also, like, we kind of dismiss because we've seen him since the very beginning of his career. He's been a public known fighter. We kind of dismiss that Blanco hasn't actually been fighting that long. Like, he's honestly at the point where things should now just be clicking for him. He's been fighting about 6 years. He should be hitting his prime. And his last 3 fights, they haven't been amazing mistake-free performances, but he's suddenly winning a lot more consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tough one because he didn't look great in that Dan Hooker fight, and the Delatorre fight was funky. But I'll pick Blanco for a funky win where he wins 4 minutes of every round and loses 1 minute terribly of every round.
I thought he looked pretty good in the Dan Hooker fight. I think it actually gave him a chance to show off his boxing against a guy who just wouldn't go away.
He looked good for most of the fight, except every round he seemed to get like badly rocked or randomly hurt.
Yeah, that's true. But he did land about 6 billion punches on Dan Hooker's chin.
Oh yeah, no, he beat Dan Hooker. Like I say, he will win like 4 minutes of every round, and then that last minute he'll lose so badly that you're like, did he lose that round?
Yeah. That's Blanco. I'm excited to watch him fight, despite myself.
Yeah. All right. Odds on this: Blanco is the slight favorite, -113 to -140. Luke Sanders, the underdog, -105 to -110 even to +110. I actually think that's all fair. This is a funky close fight. Blanco is totally untrustable, and Luke Sanders, basically, Luke Sanders is going to fight for 15 minutes straight, and he's going to fight aggressively, and he's going to fight hard. And against that kind of fighter, like, that's exactly the kind of guy that Blanco is going to struggle with.
Yeah, I think you could probably get like a prop bet on fight not going to decision if you wanted to drop something. I don't think I would feel comfortable betting on either guy in this fight.
No, I wouldn't feel at all comfortable at betting on either guy. It's just too weird a fight. That brings us to Chris Wade, Mehdi Baghdad.
Thank goodness for Chris Wade that he's not fighting Mairbek Taisumov, because I think Taisumov would have taken him apart like a butcher taking apart a slab of meat.
Yep.
That being said, Chris Wade's a very good fighter. He just had a bad skill set for Mairbek Taisumov. Skill set works a lot better for Mehdi Baghdad, who I've never found to be all that impressive. He's pretty slow. He hits pretty hard, but he's definitely hittable. Thankfully, he's durable, but it just doesn't seem to offer a lot of dynamism at all. And Wade's exactly the opposite. He's not always stunning, but he can do a lot of things. He's a wrestler with a good kickboxing game, good movement, good in the clinch. He's got really crafty submissions. His headlock submission holds are really nice. Baghdad's probably going to be there unless, again, Wade's unlikely to hurt him. So Baghdad always is the kind of guy who can land a big strike, big clinch knee or something like that. But there's just no reasonable path to victory for him here that I can see. I think Chris Wade gets a submission win probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only path to victory I can see is because Wade's not a great power wrestler. Like he doesn't have a great power double or a great outside shot or something like that. Like he can hit the occasional reactive takedown, but in general, if he's wrestling himself, he usually drives in on guys, gets them against the cage, and then forces in a sort of drag grind game that gets them to the ground.
Yeah.
Um, if he can't out clinch Baghdad, then I could see him ending up in a kickboxing game where his own kickbox, like where he can outpoint Baghdad but gets hit really hard.
Yeah. But I see him, like, even then, I see him winning a kickboxing battle against Baghdad. He's got a lot more tools. He's very much like his teammate Ryan LaFleur, where Ryan LaFleur, you could watch him and never know he's a wrestler and still think, yeah, he's a pretty solid striker.
Yeah, it's interesting. Baghdad, he really has like he's kind of the embodiment of a power Muay Thai game in MMA and like the strengths and weaknesses. He hits really hard. He sits down on every single strike. He throws some good combinations, but he basically just plants his feet in one spot. And if you move, he has to like get up, walk over to
Yeah.
where you are,
He's like a siege
replant.
engine. He has to like have engineers to break him down and rebuild him pointing a new direction if he wants
Yeah,
to hit you with a new punch.
it really is. It's like it's really weird. It's such a because I mean the Muay Thai thing, especially in certain schools of it, is very much like we are going to plant right in front of each other and not back down, and all of your defense and movement is based on like I'm going to stay right in front of you and I'm going to prove to you that I can hit harder than you and I'm going to slip your shot and I'm going to come back with something better. And he just really has that ethos ingrained into his MMA game.
Yep. And he has a
And
traditional like Thai background as far as I know.
yeah,
His head trainer is a Muay Thai guy, a Thai Muay Thai guy.
yeah, he did some kempo too, but it doesn't show up in his style at all. It's very Muay Thai heavy, and it's he picks good shots. He's got a nice strike selection. I really like his body head combos and some stuff like that. He's a powerful kicker, but I've also seeing him get outpointed by who was that guy on Tough who fought in the UFC just recently? I can't remember. He got outpointed on the Tough season he was just on, the McGregor Faber one, and he basically just got outworked for a majority decision against a much worse striker because his opponent was willing to actually move at range and just dance around him over and over again. And he had to pick up and reset and pick up and reset. And in the meantime, because he's relying all entirely on hands and upper body movement to dodge strikes, he's getting hit a lot. Like he's actually a pretty decent defensive fighter in terms of his head movement and his hand positioning and his hand movement. He's an active defender with his hands. But if you're not going to move and you're just going to rely on that, and people are still going to hit you, like you will get hit.
Was it David Tamor?
No,
Was it Abner Yoveris?
no.
I don't see any other majority decisions on here.
It was
Oh, Julian Arosa?
yeah, Julian Arosa,
Okay, that's right. Oh, he
who
beat
we've
Mehdi
seen.
Baghdad. I thought you were talking about somebody else besides Baghdad. Okay.
No, I was talking about Mehdi Baghdad. Yeah, he beat him that way, just outpointing him just by moving more. And like Baghdad hit him way harder. Every shot he landed was cleaner and way better. But Erosa was just picking at him from range, and he had to reset and reset and reset. I don't know that Chris Wade quite has that activity, but yeah, it's hard not to pick him here. Odds are, uh, let's see. Damn it. Chris Wade is the favorite minus 310 down to minus 365. Mehdi Baghdad, the favorite, plus 310 down to plus 230. And I think that is pretty reasonable.
Yeah, sounds about right.
All right, and that brings us to Tim Boach Ed Herman light heavyweight fight. Um, Ti-
Middle weight.
Tim Boach should win this. He's better. He's faster, which is weird to say. He's a better clinch fighter, and he's not a better grappler, but he's a better wrestler. And Tim Boach by TKO maybe, but Ed Herman's tough as an old boot, so whatever.
I think this one is a sneaky contender to be a really fun fight,
Yeah,
actually.
it probably will.
Because I don't ever see these days, I don't see Tim Boach and be like, oh, it's going to be amazing, because I know how
No,
many bad fights he's had. And I definitely don't see Ed Herman and say, oh, it's going to be amazing. But both of these guys are very willing to throw down against somebody who refuses to back up and who
yep,
gives no quarter. And they both do that as well. So I think this could really be a fun brawl. In that kind of fight, you have to favor Boach. He's more
yep,
durable. He hits harder. He's got all the other skill advantages that you named. Um, and he's a great comeback machine. So even if he ends up in dire straits, Ed Herman could still find himself in trouble after hurting him. So yeah, Tim Boach by TKO KO feels right to me.
yeah. I mean, like Ed Herman's not a bad puncher.
No,
He's learned to sit down on his strikes better over time, but he's never been a knockout threat. He's not a consistent enough puncher to be a
he's
knockout threat.
slow. He's so slow.
Yeah,
That's why you say it. It sounds funny to say that Tim Boach is faster, but Ed Herman is. I think he's slower than Cahal Pendred. He is utterly slow.
yeah,
And credit to him for doing as well as he has throughout his career, being that slow, because he's always been that slow. Uh,
yeah,
but but that's not going to work out well for him here.
yeah. So it's one of those fights. Like I agree. It should actually be fun. It should just be a. I expect it to be just kind of a all out dirty boxing brawl.
Yeah,
Um, and I'll enjoy that. But it is so hard to like, as an analyst, get hyped to explain this fight. It's like,
yeah. It's just they're going to hit each other. It's going to be fun to watch. Don't worry about it. It's like I would even now. I don't want to explain to you the dynamics of Ed Herman versus Trevor Smith, but that fight was bananas. It was great.
yeah, it
But
was.
not great for the reasons that I started becoming a fight analyst.
No. All right. On that note, where is this fight on this? Oh, here it is.
They forgot to add betting lines.
That's right. Tim Boach is the favorite, minus 220 up to minus 260. Ed Herman, the underdog, plus 185, 170 up to minus 206. I think that's absolutely perfect on the odds.
Sure.
And that brings us to Patrick Cote, Ben Saunders.
This is me. Should I go?
Yeah, this is you.
This fight, man, it's a great fight. I have loved Patrick Cote's renaissance. I really
Mm-hmm.
have enjoyed it. I think he has legitimately added some serious boxing ability to his game. He's a little better defensively than he used to be. Actually, substantially better because he used to be terrible defensively. So he's still not a great defensive fighter, but he has defense and he uses it to set up his counter shots and things like that. It's turned him into a pretty dangerous guy to walk in on, despite the fact that he's not all that fast. He's developed a nice jab, which is fantastic because he's still got a heavy right hand and good low kicks, and now he's got something to hide them. Um, he's still pretty low volume, and he still is a guy who really wants to be a grinding wrestler and isn't all that great at it. Like he'll get you down and he'll lay on you, but yeah, not really against good fighters. And I think those two things are going to be his downfall against Ben Saunders. I expect Cote to hurt Saunders at some point in this fight. I
Yeah.
really expect him to land a big shot. Ben is hittable, he's hurtable, but he's tough and he recovers well. And in every other area, Saunders throws a lot more volume. He can maintain distance when he feels like it. He's a little too willing. Once somebody does get inside, rather than resetting and keeping a jab in their face, he tends to exchange and try and scare them off. I think that's always been his problem.
Yeah.
Um, he does it fairly well, but he's tall, and that's a vulnerability when you're in mid range.
Yeah, and he's not comfortable there. It's sort of like I need to
Yeah.
back you off, so I'm going to throw a
Yes.
bunch of heat.
Yeah.
And as he does so, he just kind of gets lost. And
If he had better circular, angular footwork, he could work off of his jab and get back to range. He'd be great.
yeah,
And then at long range, as I said, the volume, the kicks, damaging strikes. In short range, we've got the elbows and knees and the clinch. And if Cote does get him down, which he probably will, Ben Saunders can win this fight from his back. Cote
Yep.
is just not active enough on top, and Saunders is relentless from the bottom. He's going to trap. He's going to use his rubber guard. He's going to look for omoplatas. At the very least, he can probably get top position from that. If not, work a serious submission threat with the triangle, omoplata, armbar, trifecta there. So, yeah, I think this will be a blast. This is my pick for the fight of the night in terms of sheer action. And I think Ben Saunders should be a pretty clear favorite here.
Yeah, my biggest question really is whether, and I hate to say this because I love Killer B, and I'm not going to pick against him, and I love him because he's one of us, and we must always protect our own. But I do wonder how about his chin. Like,
sure, he's taking some
I,
shots
you
over
know,
the years.
that fight against Kenny Robertson, like Kenny Robertson's a fun dude, and he's become a sneaky better puncher and stuff like that. But he had Saunders in some serious trouble in that fight. And Kenny Robertson's not the kind of dude who really ought to be holding a lot of serious power and boxing advantages over a lot of people.
Uh-huh.
And he had Saunders hurt like several times badly. And Cote is much more consistent and hits a lot harder.
I think he's probably easier, even though he's got the better jab. Rogers is like Robertson's a weird puncher.
Robertson is a funky ass fighter.
He is so hard to time, and so I think you're probably better off like going off of predisposed reactions in the clinch with Patrick Cote than you are. Like you can't bring predisposed notions of how striking is supposed to work into a fight with Kenny Robertson.
It's true. It's just the idea that because Saunders stands so tall and because his head movement is not good and his defense is not good,
Yep.
and Cote's defense is reasonably okay and his striking is a lot, he's got more power and he's got a hell of a chin. Like, I have this worry that even when, Saunders will do good for quite a while, and that, like the Berkman fight, Berkman did good for quite a while against Patrick Cote, but Cote is really fucking unbreakable.
Yeah.
And eventually he knocked Berkman out.
You have to smash him on the back of the head with an elbow to knock him out.
It's true.
And then he gets a DQ win. So you can't beat him by that method.
Yeah. So because of that, I do like, that is my fear. I'm going to pick Saunders because I think he can submit Cote. His wrestling is one of those things that it's subtraction by addition to his game. Like, it has made him a worse fighter to have that as part of his arsenal.
Yeah. It's very much like Darren Cruikshank. It's like, why? Just don't take him down. Just hit him. Nope, he's going to go for it. You know he's going to do it.
If Cote tries to out-wrestle and out-grapple Saunders, he will almost certainly lose. I think I can say that. And that's why I'm going to pick Saunders, because I think that Cote is just going to try and do... He's not going to keep enough of the fight where he should, and he's going to let Saunders outwork him in certain positions. But I have a lingering fear that Saunders will be doing well for like 2 rounds and then just get melted.
That's I agree with you 100% of the way. That's why I said I do think Saunders is going to get hurt in this fight. I think he will recover like he did in the Robertson fight, but I do think he's going to get stung at least once and get wobbled. But I just think Cote is going to drag him to the ground and try and follow up there. And I don't think Cote can compete with him in Killaby's guard.
No, he can't. On that note, Cote is a very slight underdog, plus 100 down to minus 110. Saunders is a very slight favorite, minus 112 down to minus 125. Those feel like good right odds to me. This is a very much a coin flip fight. I do not feel safe picking either fighter, frankly. And that brings us to, where am I? Here we are. That's the end of the Fox Sports 1 prelims. That brings us to the Fox Sports 1 main card. Ross Pearson, Francisco Trinaldo. This is a great fight. This is a fight I'm excited for. And this is a fight where Ross Pearson's another one of those dudes where I keep getting thrown off on him and his career because I've seen so much of it. But I'm like, oh, Pearson's getting worn down. He's, starting to decline a little, like, especially when he had that run of, like, not so much the Diego Sanchez loss, but the Quinta knockout, and then especially. And it's just kind of like, Ross Pearson, like, he got knocked out by Cub Swanson, and even, wins over GSOT and Ryan Couture are nice, but he got knocked out by Melvin Guillard, frankly. I mean, he can say what he wants to about that fight, and it can be an illegal no contest, but Guillard was running roughshod over him.
He wasn't on his way to winning, that's for damn sure.
Yeah. And then, he had the a really crap fight with Diego Sanchez that he should have won, but still a crap fight. And then, wins over Gray Maynard and Sam Stout just don't mean that much. They don't.
Worked by Evan Dunham.
Yeah, and he got worked by Evan Dunham, and he got knocked out by Ali Aquina. And I was kind of like, am I seeing? Because I love Ross Pearson. I always have. I've been a fan of his for years. And I was like, are we seeing him decline? We've seen him. He's been around forever. And I actually go back and I look, and he's been around since 2007. That's more or less the start of his career. And that puts him right in the middle of his prime right now. And then he fights Paul Felder, and you can actually see his prime. Like,
yeah,
getting
because a prime is the perfect intersection of athletic ability and experience. And that's what that was in that fight. Like, he was fast enough and sharp enough to stay ahead of Felder and smart enough to know how to play that fight just as it was meant to be played.
Yeah, and, to his credit, Evan Dunham is another fighter who we've seen forever, but is actually in his prime right now and is fighting like he's in his prime right now. Iaquinta's just, is another rising fighter in the same situation. Sanchez fight was garbage. And then Guillard is a hot and cold talent, and Swanson is too. And so if you can look at this from two aspects. It's like a lot of Pearson's wins haven't meant that much, but a lot of his losses don't mean that much either.
Yeah, if you just look at Pearson's entire resume, he's just not a great fighter. That's
no,
the thing. Like, he's very good throughout his whole career, and he loses some and wins some, but he's consistently very good.
He's an action gatekeeper, is precisely what he is.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing right now, especially in that Felder fight, is that it seems like he's really found. Like, we can see it feels like his pocket boxing is really starting to click with his footwork. Because for a long time, Pearson's thing to me has been that he's a fighter that he's been fairly foot slow. And so it's even when he's like good in the pocket and he's mixing it up well and he fights well there, he stays in the pocket and he doesn't get out of the pocket that well. So that he gets cracked. And in that Felder fight, we're starting to see a guy who had much better movement and was picking his way in and out of the pocket really well. And I love that. Like, that's great. I mean, I don't think that Ross Pearson, even in his prime, is going to be more than an action gatekeeper. But that fight especially shows me that he could be a better class of action gatekeeper than we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
And against Francisco Trinaldo's another guy who has come on late and also is been fighting not that long for his age, seems to be hitting his prime right now, has finally got money to train like a real fighter. And that's shown how good an athlete he is to go with his skill. Like, now that he actually has some skill to go with his athleticism, it's like, oh, wow, you're actually a really, really great athlete. But I don't know. I'm not going to pick him to beat Ross Pearson because partially I'm still a Ross Pearson mark, but I'm not. I mean, I think that what we've seen out of Pearson is just, we have seen a more evolved game out of Pearson that works at a really good high-level gatekeeper ability, whereas Trinaldo is still this kind of mixed of athleticism and skill where he's not quite dominating with either. And when it clicks just right for him, when he's got a big athletic edge, especially, as he's had in several of his more recent fights, he can do some great things. But we've also seen, tight decisions against or that, like a tight decision against Norman Park and some fights like that I'm just not I'm not bent on Trinaldo taking this fight over, and I think if he doesn't, that Ross Pearson can. So I'm gonna pick Ross Pearson to be the better at moving in and out of range like we saw last time and boxing in the pocket in a way that will keep Trinaldo just enough at bay to steal rounds because if Trinaldo does click too, like that's the only danger is that both these guys seem to be fighting at their best right now. And so we could see things just really clicking for Trinaldo too, at which point he's the more powerful athlete and the more powerful puncher.
Yeah, I agree. I think Pearson is probably at his best now, and it was maybe kind of difficult to see that prior to the Felder fight, just because he's also fighting the best competition of his career.
Mm-hmm.
We look through, it was a couple of high points, but mostly fighting mid-tier opponents. Ally Quinton, Evan Dunham, both at the top of their game right now. But when he fought all the guys slightly below that, Paul Felder being just slightly below that, and Gray Maynard and Sam Stout being considerably below that, he won the Maynard and Stout fights, dominant knockout wins. The Paul Felder fight, very impressive decision. Um, I do think that Trinaldo is also at his best. I think I think the reason, because I favor Trinaldo here, and I
Mm.
think the reason I like Trinaldo is that the difficulty he always has in his fights is that he doesn't switch between modes very well. He's a very strong grappler. Um, yeah, he's a very strong grappler, and he's a very capable striker. He's actually really good on his feet.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but between the two, when he's striking, he's off balance to grapple, and he's just not ready to sprawl until he'll get taken down. And when he's grappling, he's not really mixing in strikes and blending phases. He's kind of just in jujitsu mode. Um, his advantage is that he doesn't freak out when he gets caught off guard. He's very calm and very patient on the ground. I don't think Pearson has that same quality on the ground.
It's
I
true.
think in that Dunham fight, we saw that Pearson was a little frenetic, trying to get back to his feet. He was really trying to escape positions, giving up his back in the process. I think that's a risk against Trinaldo. Um, and I think that Trinaldo can close that distance really quickly. This is the one fight that he'll have had in some time where, like the Chad Laprise fight, he doesn't have to worry about being taken down.
It's true.
And if Pop Pearson does take him down, I think Trinaldo can sweep him and work with him on the ground or scramble with him. He's better there. So Trinaldo coming forward without having to worry about a reactive takedown, I think is a pretty dangerous guy. Pearson's got good defense, but he's still somewhat hittable. He's been knocked out twice before, and Trinaldo packs a serious punch. So I don't think Trinaldo will finish him, but I do think that I like Trinaldo for a decision, pretty tightly contested, close fight. But I like Trinaldo to basically land the more meaningful shots, do a little bit of controlling on the ground, and take the nod.
Yeah, Trinaldo, for as decent a grappler as he is, especially from top, he's not actually like an amazing technical grappler. Like he's a if he can really outpower you and you'll give up make a mistake, he will get a submission. He's not terrible at it, but he's also he's not like amazing at just out grappling and outmaneuvering people
No.
necessarily. Yeah, it is a tough one. It's tough for me because it's both guys who have had some real inconsistency in their career and have been mistaken for having peaked earlier than they did.
Yeah, and I went into this fight thinking like, yeah, probably Pearson, but when I peruse his record, he just hasn't faced many wrestlers. That's the thing. Like Ross Pearson, I think for some time has kind of been protected from a matchmaking perspective as like the English guy who can't wrestle. And he's not a terrible wrestler. He's got good instincts, but he still doesn't do it that well. The Evan Dunham fight really opened my eyes to that. I thought he was out wrestled a lot more easily than I thought he would be. And I picked Evan Dunham to win that fight, but I thought it'd be really competitive, and it was more one-sided than I expected.
Yeah.
And other than that, like the best wrestlers he faced are a Gray Maynard who didn't try to wrestle him, and Ryan Couture. Like just no good wrestlers. And Trinaldo's a pretty solid wrestler. He's not amazing, but he's strong and he's got a really fast shot. He covers distance really quickly. So I think that'll probably be the deciding factor.
Yeah, that could easily be it. I'm kind of thinking about it more as just a pure striking battle. But Trinaldo, if Trinaldo can make himself pull the gear or pull the lever to switch gears,
Yes. Yeah, if he can
c-
kick the clutch out of its rusted in spot and step back and then suddenly decide to go for a takedown.
then yeah, I could definitely see Trinaldo taking a decision over Pearson. If he can't, if he just makes it a kickboxing bout, I think it'll be competitive. But I'm picking Pearson to win there.
Yeah, I think Pearson wins a pure striking match for sure.
So depending on which one we see, it's a tough fight. I like the fight though. Like I do
Yeah,
think it'll be interesting.
yeah.
Ross Pearson is very slightly favored, minus 145 to minus 165. Trinaldo, the underdog, plus 115 to plus 135. I do not think it's a fight worth betting on. As I say, both fighters are in their prime right now. And I think it's just one of those things where it, it's going to be who gets the best chance to implement their game because I don't expect either guy to give up a lot of easy opportunities.
Mhm.
That brings us to heavyweight Travis Brown, Matt Mitrione. I believe it's your turn to take this one away.
Well, this is my big winner pick because I'm picking Matt Mitrione to beat Travis Brown. I here's the thing. Let's hear me out here. Hear me out. Travis Brown is a ranked 7 best heavyweight in the world. He got to that position. He got into the top 5 initially before losing to Fabricio Verdum. No shame in a loss to Verdum, obviously, who is now the
Mm-hmm.
champion. But he got to that position with 3 wins, all of which I think are highly suspect. 2 of them coming by a really bizarre idiosyncratic position where he elbowed the brains out of 2 really solid grapplers who really felt like they had to get him to the ground. Unlikely for that to happen again. Everyone who has tried to take him down since has gone for quick shot takedowns and then let go, or gone for head inside takedowns like Fabricio Verdum did and gotten him down. Then he had the Alistair Overeem fight, which I don't think anyone would have complained if it had been stopped. When Overeem was smashing Travis Brown on the ground, would have probably been called an early stoppage by some, but would have been justified. And he comes back. Overeem goes into full post bully mentality and folds as Brown just like plays target practice with his chin with front kicks from long range. Since then, Travis Brown has not looked very good. He looked completely clueless against Fabricio Verdum, and that fight compelled him to switch from Jackson's to Edmund Tarverdian. Probably also the fact that he's dating Ronda Rousey compelled him to switch. Brendan Schaub fight, it was Schaub. Schaub like lunged into a big uppercut. Not much happened until the big shot landed. And then we saw what we always know about Travis Brown. He's big and strong, and he hits hard. And, when he gets you hurt, he's a killing machine. The Arlovsky fight, what was Travis Brown doing in that fight? Like, what was his plan? No idea. This is the thing: is Travis Brown? I had issues with his game. I wrote an article when he fought Verdum comparing, as best as I could see it, the Jackson Winklejohn training methodology to the Rafael Cordero training methodology, and I definitely favored the Cordero methodology. I favor the Jackson Winklejohn method that Brown was using then to whatever he's doing with Taverdian now, because he has replaced his oddball collection of bizarre kicks and Superman punches and flying knees with like really, really bare bones boxing
Yeah.
with like maybe 2 punches at a time, really labored head movement, and he's fighting in close now, trying to slip punches and play in the pocket. I think that's a recipe for disaster because he's tall and pretty slow. I know he's often been called really athletic, but he's 6'7" and he moves like someone who's 6'7". He's not that fast to be standing toe to toe. Matt Mitrione is really fast. He's very fast for a heavyweight. He has great hand speed as well as foot speed. He's a very accurate puncher. And like we noted at the beginning of the show, he's got those big ass meathead hands that let him pack a really significant punch when he does land. Obviously, the difficulties from him in this fight are that he's kind of fragile and kind of questionable from a fight IQ perspective. But I don't know why we're all being expected to count on Travis Brown from a fight IQ perspective. Really, what we're counting on here, and the reason that Brown is the favorite, is that Brown can take a better shot than Mitrione, but Mitrione can deliver about 3 times as many shots as Travis Brown and move and run circles around him in the process. So I absolutely see why Brown is favored. but I don't think he's actually a top 10 heavyweight in any kind of concrete way. Nor do I think Mitrione is, but I think Mitrione is truly a bad style matchup for him. I think it'll be something similar to the Andrei Arlovsky fight. Another fighter who, mind you, is not that durable, who still managed to use speed and power and combination punching to just beat the shit out of Travis Brown. So I think something similar will happen.
That that is all really sound, technical, good, very very precise breaking down, and I would be totally sold, except that
I knew there was an accept coming.
that what this fight's really going to come down to is which one of them has slaughtered the most goats to the elder gods.
It's heavyweight MMA. I
Yeah,
shouldn't even put the effort thinking about it because it's heavyweight MMA.
like it really, one of them will open a portal to forbidden dimensions and call upon the blood gods with their sacrifices to win this fight, and the other one won't. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I think you're right. I think that. I mean, yeah. What the thing with Jackson MMA, and we've talked our fair share of smack about it, over the time, but they do a couple of things really well that deserve a lot of recognition. First of all, they maximize the athletic potential of their fighters. They get maximum value for athleticism out of their guys.
They get athletes to do athletic shit.
Exactly. So if you are a good athlete, Jackson Wink will have you take advantage of that. They will give you the tools to do the things that your opponent can't because you're a better athlete than them. And that's valuable. That's great. Like, that is shit that fighters who are good athletes should be doing, things like that. That is part of what is going to make you better than your opponent. Mm-hmm. And they are great at keeping fighters in control, at getting fighters to plan for an opponent and to not deviate from that plan. And they're especially good at it with fighters who deviate from every imaginable plan at every possible moment. And that, I mean, those are two things that deserve a lot of recognition because you win a lot of fights like that. Like,
oh yeah, all my complaints about Jackson Winklejohn have always been about the technical aspect of things, which A, I think that's getting better, and B, yep, not to denigrate my own job, but technique is a surprisingly small part of fighting. You know, if you have a guy with garbage technique and great mental conditioning and coaching, he's going to beat a lot of good fighters.
Or we talked about Sean O'Connell. He is tough and aggressive and consistent. And there may not be any technique there, but that shit gets him wins in the UFC.
Yeah, even better when you have a guy who has a lot of athletic advantages on top of that.
Yeah. So, and yeah, I think that actually some of it seems like they have some new striking coaches. I know they have Gibson, and I think there's somebody else there too. I'm trying to remember.
As far as I know, Brandon Gibson is doing most of the striking training, and I like the changes that I've seen from him more than I liked what I saw from Winklejohn beforehand.
Yeah, it seems like I've noticed a positive shift in their technical striking since then. It seems like I'm seeing less random flashy shit for the sake of random flashy shit.
Yeah, and the random shit makes sense. Like Andrei Arlovsky's back fist is like, okay, Andrei, you're not going to use your left hand. We know it. Let's throw a back fist after that right hand. Beautiful addition. It worked great.
Yeah. So I am, I like what I'm seeing there. And yeah, out of the Tarvedian camp, I mean, we know that, like, outside of Ronda Rousey, there are no successful fighters there. There are nobody's winning out of that camp. And now Ronda Rousey isn't. And we have very big questions about how she'll adjust to that. So I think there's a lot that, I mean, I've said for a long time now that Matt Mitrione is one of the most underrated heavyweights in the UFC. Of course, the thing he's best at is going out and proving me wrong for saying that about him.
Yes.
And that's what this comes down to, is that, I mean, I think you're right. I think Matt Mitrione can absolutely answer Brown with more volume, better shot selection. He's a good, consistent boxer. He has great power. He's a great athlete. And I have no idea what kind of fight shape Travis Brown's going to show him up in. I don't mean like conditioning. I know he'll be well conditioned, but just in terms of what tools he'll be using and what he's going to try and do, it seems like it could be really limited. The biggest question for me with Mitrione is just how easily can he be scared off his game?
Mm-hmm.
Because like what we saw with the Ben Roethlisberger fight was
Ben Rothwell.
or Ben Rothwell, not Ben Roethlisberger. Oh, Matt Mitrione is not a woman in a bar bathroom, so
I thought of a joke and then I was like, I won't make it.
no, I'm making that joke.
I was gonna say Mitrione was assaulted in that fight, but not in the way you're thinking.
Yeah, but no, the Ben Rothwell fight, like he was doing all right in that fight,
probably getting the better of the exchanges.
Yeah, but he got clipped with a couple shots, and it was just like, okay, no, I better try some wrestling on this guy, put him on his back, and that's an exceptionally bad idea against Travis Brown. We have seen this time and again.
Shit that Brown capitalizes on really well.
Yeah, and Mitrione is not. He's so prone to making bad fight decisions. And this is not the reactive, I'm in the flow of the moment, I see an opportunity thing. This is a different kind of bad fight IQ.
Yeah, it's like, oh shit, things are going wrong, time to change it up. And it's really not even going that badly. Like you're fine. Just stick what you're doing and adjust within what's already working.
Yeah. It's a confidence issue.
Can I tell you what this fight feels like to me?
Sure.
It feels just like Overeem Dos Santos.
Yes.
Which is another fight that everything except the technical aspects of the fight made me feel like I should definitely not pick Alistair Overeem.
Yeah.
Because obviously he's not as good. His ranking doesn't even though a lot of things were wrong with Junior Dos Santos, but we all acknowledged that before the fight. We're like, yeah, but Junior Dos Santos is a top heavyweight. This is a flimsier version of that. Because Matt Mitrione isn't as dangerous or as battle tested as Overeem. But I think Brown deserves his ranking a lot less than JDS. And I think with a few very different, slightly different circumstances, he would not have ever been a top 10 heavyweight. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The thing is, though, is the modern heavyweight era is made on slightly different circumstances.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the problem.
Big consequences. That's the heavyweight division. There's a one mistake and everything changes.
Yep. So I guess, you know what? I'm going to join you in hell and pick Matt Mitrione.
We're gonna be hailed if he wins. They're gonna throw olive wreaths on our heads and feed us grapes after his victory. We'll join Matt Mitrione at his sex-filled after party. It's gonna be great, Zane.
I think Matt Mitrione has slaughtered just a few more goats before this fight.
He lives in Indiana, so yeah, probably.
Probably.
I'm a neighbor of Indiana. They do that kind of shit over there.
Yeah, the odds on this fight are -147 for Travis Brown. He's the favorite to -165. Matt Mitrione is the slight underdog, +133 down to +120. Do not bet on this fight. Do not look at this fight. Bet on fight ends in fight. Let's see. Fight starts round 2 is a +102. Fight won't start bet. 102 is a -132.
That's not a bad bet. I think a Mitrione late knockout is pretty good. So you could say fight does not go to decision. Oh, it's -675. Jesus. Mitrione.
I think fight starts round 2 at +102 might be your best way to make money off this, maybe.
Or maybe Mitrione by KO. If you're going to pick a fighter to bet on, Mitrione by KO is +174. It does sweeten his odds considerably, and I don't see him winning a decision.
No, I don't see either of these guys winning a decision.
I don't see either of them winning. I can't even picture either of them winning in my head.
No. All right, let's get on to an actually good fight. Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez. This is a great fight, and unfortunately, I think it's both a proving point and a stopping point for Eddie Alvarez. I don't know that Eddie Alvarez, I'm not sure that he's a top 5 lightweight.
No.
He's a great fighter, and a fun fighter, but he's been fighting at disadvantages for years. And in the UFC, like, he just doesn't have enough of the advantages at the very elite. He's a top 10 guy,
I think
without a
we will
doubt.
find that Eddie Alvarez is like right on par with Edson Barboza.
Yeah, exactly. And I Anthony Pettis is a top 5 guy. He is just like, that fight with RDA, the fact that it went 5 rounds is a testament to how close not Eddie Alvarez, but Anthony Pettis is to the elite.
Yeah.
We know he can be swarmed and backed off, and that he does have that same sort of, like, he's fighting in the pocket not because he loves fighting in the pocket, but he wants to back you out of the pocket.
Yeah.
But he hits really, really hard, and he's really accurate, and he's really, really fast when doing it. And Eddie Alvarez is good at swarming in the pocket, but he gets hit really hard, gets dropped really consistently, and is not actually a great power punching threat there. He tends to take a lot of the steam off his own punches by being really light on his feet. Or leaning out over his feet, frankly. I mean, he does not sit well square on his punches and deliver. And when he does, he gets hit hard. So I don't see him just out wrestling Anthony Pettis, even if Anthony Pettis is more willing than he should be to go drop to his back. I don't see Eddie Alvarez doesn't have a great consistent shot. He's the kind of guy who he shoots in, it doesn't work. The fight gets pushed up against the cage, and then he's fought a lot, especially in Bellator. He fought a lot of smaller guys, or guys that were as small as him, that he could kind of push around there. Patricky Freire, Shinya Aoki, Pat Curran, Roger Huerta. These are not big, powerful lightweights. They're guys that are more on par with his size, where his ability to then push them against the fence meant more. Anthony Pettis is not a huge lightweight, but he's not a small one. Like, he's not outsized at lightweight at all.
He's the right size.
He's the right size. He's a good sized lightweight. And he's willing to go down to his back, but he's not just like, he doesn't fall over when you try to take him down. So if this becomes a battle in the clinch, I just see that Pettis can go to that well of counter striking because he has the speed and the power and the athleticism to do it too well and back Eddie Alvarez off too consistently, at which point Eddie Alvarez has to spend a lot more time at range trying to work against Anthony Pettis. And I don't think he can afford that.
Mm-hmm. And you said going into this that we've moved on from the heavyweight matchup and said now on to an actually good fight. I think from a matchup perspective, this one's less compelling than Brown Mitrione, because I think Pettis is a pretty easy pick here. I think the compelling thing about this fight is seeing Anthony Pettis back in action, because we had all these flaws. I don't want to say exposed or revealed, but we were reminded of a lot of the flaws.
Really spelled out, made yes. Perfectly clear.
All of his flaws underlined. We saw the Gilbert Melendez fight. We're like, okay, these things are a problem. We saw the RDA fight. We're like, these are catastrophic issues.
Yeah.
And so it makes this fight feel closer than it is, because I don't think that Eddie Alvarez is really well equipped to expose any of those same holes. He's pretty good at putting on pressure and brawling and stuff like that, but I don't think that Pettis is going to brawl with him the way that Michael Chandler did. If it comes down to a thing where Alvarez is hurt and decides to come after him, Pettis isn't great at keeping distance, but he's accurate and he will move if you get space. And Alvarez is not a pressure fighter. He has had trouble almost every time that he has had to pressure somebody. The Donald Cerrone fight really comes to mind, where it looked pretty good for him early. He landed a big shot. Henry Hooft screaming at him in the corner, trying to get him to cut Cerrone off and to get in close and to angle in and get inside and work his punches, and he just could not make himself do it. And Anthony Pettis is an even more defined outfighter than Donald Cerrone and a more dangerous one. And if Eddie Alvarez is going to be at a distance with Anthony Pettis where Pettis can let his kicks go and can throw straight punches, I think he's in a really, really tough situation. I think best case scenario for him here is that he does try to pressure and ends up wearing himself out doing it like Gilbert Melendez did. Because Melendez isn't really a pressure fighter either, and it's exhausting to try
Yeah.
to fight against type like that and be in these tough exchanges, because even if Pettis isn't comfortable, he will exchange with you if you try to come in, and he will hit you and he will hurt you. And then he's dangerous with his submissions in the clinch and on the ground as well. So
Yeah. I mean,
I,
I feel like the idea, I don't want to say that too much in the past has been made of his loss to Clay Guida, but I think, it's sort of like for Pettis, I don't think that what we saw with Clay Guida and what we saw with Rafael dos Anjos aren't exactly the same thing, if that makes sense. Like what we saw with Guida, they're both pressure fighters that can cause Anthony Pettis trouble. What we saw with Guida is like a pressure fighter causing Anthony Pettis trouble. And then we've seen Pettis evolve over time to be better and better at handling that. Like we saw in Gilbert Melendez fight, a pressure fighter or somebody trying to pressure causing Anthony Pettis trouble and getting starched.
you can't just be a person and decide to pressure Anthony Pettis anymore. Like that has to be your thing. You have to, you have to be an expert at that.
Yeah, and the thing with RDA is what we now know about RDA and what we saw in that fight is a power monster.
Yeah.
On pressuring Anthony Pettis and sucking, a soul-sucking, life force draining monster fighting Anthony Pettis.
I do like thinking of RDA as some kind of mythical, horrible beast. Yeah, they went. Anthony Pettis had been beaten to a pulp in the middle of the night, and then they went and dug up Rafael dos Anjos' grave, and his body was swelled with fresh blood. Oh
exactly.
God, he's been out feasting on innocence again. Yeah,
exactly.
I agree with you. You have to be like a very solid, very powerful. You have to be so determined to pressure and so naturally attuned to it that you have no problem sitting in the pocket and taking shots, because Rafael dos Anjos took a lot of hard punches and knees and kicks from Anthony Pettis in that fight. Shots that would have backed off almost anybody else in the division. Shots that have backed off the other top fighters in the division, like Donald Cerrone, like Gilbert Melendez, like Ben Henderson. And I think Eddie Alvarez is not on that tier. So I picked Anthony Pettis by decision. And I'm not sure why, because I really feel like he's going to knock Alvarez out.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing we saw, I mean, it's a thing where like what you see out of fighters a lot of times isn't that they fill the holes they have in their game. It's that the holes in their game get way, way, way harder to exploit. Like if you take Anthony Pettis and you look at him on the what I like to think of as the Edson Barboza scale, what we've seen over time out of Edson Barboza is that the holes in his game have not been fixed. He's not magically unhittable in the pocket. Or he's not magically like the recipe to beat him is still pressure, 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 box in the pocket, and then force him to wrestle and grapple with you. Mm-hmm. Like that is still his game. It's not like he's now this jiu-jitsu wizard where you're like, oh, I can't tangle with Edson Barboza on the ground. What a wizard. Anthony Pettis, the recipe to beating him, it is still drive in on him, drive through his shots, and then make him work and make him wrestle and make him grind round after round after round. But that has gotten exponentially more difficult to do.
Yeah, and while you're doing it, you're going to have to eat shots. He's harder to take down than he was. You got to watch your neck while you're going for the takedowns. Like, it's just a lot of things to worry about. It's taxing. And I don't think there are many guys in this division right now who can pressure fight well enough to do that without just being dead tired and hurtable after maybe 2 rounds. And I don't think Eddie Alvarez is going to try to fight that kind of pressure anyway, because I don't think he can make himself do it.
No, it's just Eddie Alvarez does not have that pressure game to do that. I don't see it out of him. He's not Clay Guida. He's not Rafael dos Anjos. And like I say, Clay Guida, you put him in there with Anthony Pettis today. Clay Guida is not even the Clay Guida of then would not beat Anthony Pettis today. Like he doesn't. That game has evolved for Anthony Pettis. So
It'll be a
I
reminder of how good Anthony Pettis is, I think.
yeah. So the odds on this fight, Anthony Pettis is the favorite, minus 310 to minus 365. Eddie Alvarez, the underdog, plus 295 down to plus 230. And I think, I'm not going to say it's too close. It's a decent spread. It's not an outlandish spread, but
It's close enough where I feel like Pettis might actually be worth a bet at those odds.
yeah.
You know, like if you're going to drop a 20 on Pettis, I wouldn't see that as a bad bet. I think he's a pretty damn close to a lock to win.
Yeah. And that brings us to our main event, TJ Dillashaw, Dominic Cruz. Take it away.
Well, I have there are a lot of layers of questions for this fight, obviously. Many of them that don't have to do with the technical aspect that we really can't answer. We have to wait for the fight to answer some of these questions. Like we have to wait for the fight to even know what the parameters of the questions are. Like, how is Cruz after his second massive layoff? The guy who's only had one fight in 54 months. How is he going to perform? How would he have done against Takeya Mizugaki if he hadn't blown him out of the water in a minute? You know, would he have had a massive adrenaline dump? Because that was not the way that Cruz normally fought, and he really went for the kill in that fight. Like he was just amped to be back. Then he gets injured again. Will he do the same thing in this fight? We don't know how either of these guys deal with the style of the man they are about to face. TJ Dillashaw has never faced a highly mobile opponent with great timing, not only on strikes, but on takedowns. That's a difficult and utterly unique matchup because so far he has kind of feasted on guys who are plotters and counter strikers who kind of wait for him to come in and he can dance around them. Maybe the closest, now even then, like Rafael Sunsao, great striker, great wrestler, but relatively stationary. You know, a counter striker or a forward moving kind of a plotter too. That's not Dominic Cruz. Likewise, Dominic Cruz has never ever dealt with a fighter like TJ Dillashaw. Dominic Cruz is from a generation where his style was so bizarre that the vast majority of his opponents just watched him move around them and waited for him to come in and try to time him, and that was all they knew to do. It's what Faber did. It's what Benavidez did. Everybody is just kind of like, well, I guess I'm gonna time him somehow, and then you can't do it because it's Dominic Cruz. So it's really difficult to suss out how exactly this fight's going to look. I think the advantage lies with Dillashaw for a couple of reasons. First of all, his activity. He's been active. He's now in probably what is the best camp of his life. No more distractions with trying to deal with camp problems. Missing the training partners from Alpha Male, I don't think will be as big a problem as not having Dwayne Ludwig, because I think Ludwig has been pretty clearly responsible for the revolution in his style. I think he has more of an advantage in this fight because when I think about it, the big question in this fight tactically is distance. Who can control the distance? I think Dominic Cruz needs to be able to keep Dillashaw at bay. He needs to be able to navigate the ring, and he needs to be able to get takedowns. I think he really needs to be able to get in when he needs to get in and knock Dillashaw off his feet in order to win this. Meanwhile, Dillashaw needs to try to take the distance away and maintain it and land shots. And I think Dillashaw's better equipped to do that because both of these guys are very difficult to just judge by looking at them. They're very tricky with how they move their feet and their heads. They're constantly playing with perceptions of distance. Dillashaw will come into range and level change and lean his head forward, and you throw a jab, and suddenly he feels like he's 3 feet away. And all he does is take half a step back and lean back over his back foot. And then he can jump right back in and hit you when he just felt like he was way too far away. Likewise, Dominic Cruz will be dancing around the octagon. Seems like he's 20 yards away from you. Suddenly, he's in and he's taking you off your feet when you take one step a little too far forward. So what you have to do against a guy like that is be able to touch him. You have to be able to judge where he is by feel, not with your hands. And Dillashaw of the two is definitely the higher volume striker. Dillashaw is the guy who feels where his opponent is, who gets his jab out there, who flicks and touches and measures and blinds and distracts and sets up things to come. And that's never been Cruz's thing. Cruz is always trying to he wants you to buy into what he's selling with his movement, and then he'll jump in across that distance. And even against guys who were just waiting to counter him, he was always kind of hittable doing that. And I think Dillashaw is going to have a lot more success hitting him than most guys. I think, unfortunately, as much as I like Dominic Cruz's weirdo style, I think it's kind of going to look like a guy who, though obviously still a master of his craft, is used to fighting a bygone generation that we're not really going to see at the elite levels of this sport anymore. So I like TJ Dillashaw. I think it's a decision. I think Cruz probably takes 1 or 2 rounds, but I think it's fairly clearly Dillashaw's fight. I feel like 65-35 if I had to put a percentage on it. Pretty sure it's Dillashaw's.
Yeah, I mean, the big things first and foremost are that I just can't bet on a guy who's fought 1 minute in 5 years. Like, I can't do it. And people trying to tell me that they know what Dominic Cruz fights like right now, I think are insane. You know, people are like, oh, well, what we saw in that Mizugaki fight, like, dude, what we saw in that Mizugaki fight was a minute, a year and a half ago.
It was an incredible minute.
It was.
Minute,
but like, I haven't gone back and rewatched it, and I'm not gonna to try and figure out what Dominic Cruz is gonna do because it's bullshit. Like, there's nothing. If you're trying to analyze who a fighter is over, at this stage in his career, especially at this stage in his career, when you have a wealth of top level fights to see them in, like,
it's worth watching to say this is what happened and here's how Cruz did it and to appreciate the technique. I don't think it's worth watching as a predictive element.
Exactly. Like,
how can you count on it?
Yeah, if I'm watching tape on a guy that I think is a prospect and I want to figure out how he fights, if I can, I try to watch nothing that's older than 2 years at all. And even if it's older than a year, I'm kind of like, oh, I really don't want to use this, but if it's all I've got, it's all I've got. Because fighters, they progress, they change, they grow, things click differently as they go down the line. And with a guy who's been out that long and been out for long stretches in between, like, if all I have is that 1 minute in 5 years to go on, I ain't drawing shit out of that. I'm just not. Like,
people have rightly pointed out to me too that what if Dominic Cruz has actually progressed? What if he's really focused on his technique? What if he comes in and he does look like he did against Mizugaki?
Oh yeah.
And yeah, he really could. He could come in and shock us and look like he's gotten much better because he's that talented and that smart. But as an analyst, how the hell can I say that that's likely to happen?
Yeah, I mean, like, I would rather be surprised than try to tell people I knew it would happen all along.
Yeah.
Like, there's no value in that to me. There's no value in being like, yes, I made that stupid assertion, and guess what? It was true. Like, it doesn't have any place.
It's like picking Moreau's over Calderwood.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's just, it wasn't going to happen beforehand. It only happened, and I was glad I didn't see it coming because it was fun, but still going back, would not have predicted that result.
No. And then you see Moreau's against Letourneau, and it's like, now I know how Moreau's fights, and I'm not predicting her. I don't even know if I predicted her to beat Letourneau. I don't think I did, but if I did, I'm not shocked at how that fight ended up going down. And it's just, the biggest thing for me here is that Cruz, and this is the thing that I think, I don't know, I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this, so I'm happy to talk about it briefly, is that Cruz, for all of his movement and everything we see from him, tends to attack on straight lines with single shots. Like, if I to use fingers, here's Cruz, and he's going like this, 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 and jumping in and out, and in and out, and in and out, and in and out. And then he'll do that, after all that, he'll just go like this, and strike, and then he'll take an angle, and come out. and that's how he fights. Here, here, in, out. That's it. And what Dillashaw does, and what we see from him, is we see the same kind of in out from the range, different footwork, different nuances to it, but in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, and he comes in and he shifts and he strikes and he shifts and he strikes and he shifts and he strikes and then he moves out.
Yeah, they have very different approaches. They have different emphases. Where
Yeah.
Dillashaw, Cruz uses his angles to escape safely, oftentimes at the cost of even landing a damaging shot. And he has admitted this. He thinks that is the correct way to fight.
Yeah.
And for him, it probably is, because I'm sure if he tried to fight like Dillashaw, he'd wind up in trouble. Dillashaw uses his angles offensively. He uses angles to open up new opportunities to hit you. He clearly places doing damage above defense.
And he comes in on angles. And that's the thing, is that Cruz doesn't. And that's why he's been so hittable for as much as he moves around and as much as he has all this footwork, and as hard as he is to time, it's, when he actually comes in and commits to a strike, he gets hit a lot. Like, not, I'm not saying like, oh, he's just there to, he's a damage sponge or something like that. But generally when he commits to strikes, we've seen him get countered. It's
hard to time him, but the target is open.
And the reason is because he doesn't come in and then shift to the angle that best suits not getting hit. He comes in and tries to strike and then shifts to an angle and gets out. Whereas Dillashaw, you will see him move in, and as he's coming in, he is shifting to find an angle around your punch. Like, he does not just come in and throw on a straight line, and he's usually not there to be hit because of it.
Yeah.
I
think it comes down to the fact that he's gauging as he comes in. He's constantly reassessing his distance and his angle and changing on the fly in accordance with that. Cruz is more of a rote striker, where he has an idea of what he wants to do before he launches the attack, and then he carries it to its completion.
Exactly. Like, he decides, okay, I'm now finally going to commit on this straight right, and then he leaps in and punches, and then he gets out. And, it's just like, okay, I threw that punch, now I got to get out of here. Yeah. Whereas Dillashaw is more, I'm coming in, let's see what you do. I'm going to feint. Okay, you threw that, so now I'm going to slip here, and I'm going to throw 3-punch combination, and then I'm going to slip again, and I'm going to see if there's another opening. If there is, I'll take it, and if there's not, I'll get out.
Yeah, as a fighter, I think he is more prone to collecting data, and technically, his techniques, they enhance that. His techniques allow him to collect information constantly.
And then the other question I have is, Alliance is, how much is that a growing camp? How much is that a camp where you grow?
It's a shrinking camp in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of fighters leave there, but I mean, just like technically, how much is it a place where fighters evolve? I think it's a place where they get in shape, and I think it's a place where they can get the best out of their fundamentals, because it's going to be a controlled environment where they get a lot of high level sparring, and they get a lot of good work in, and they get good nutrition and good, like, all the environment is there to get them in UFC fight shape. But I think of Miles Jury, and I think of a guy who was kind of the same for a long time. Or I think of Phil Davis, and I don't think of a fighter who was constantly evolving and adding new pieces to his game. I think of a fighter who had this sort of bouncy, awkward, long-range striking game that never meshed with his wrestling game, and who never really evolved as a grappler like he should have.
Yeah, there have been a couple guys who weren't fundamentally good who got fundamentals there, like Jeremy Stevens, or I don't know, Ross Pearson's looked okay at Alliance, I guess.
Yeah, but he works a lot from home too, we know.
And you really get the sense that of the weirdness of Dominic Cruz's style, and all of the technical prowess that he has is kind of his doing. You get the sense that he is a creative guy who wants to experiment and try new things, and that's why he's got such an idiosyncratic approach to fighting. And it's not something to do with the camp, the gym, the team, the coaches having refined him.
So if I think of, like, do I expect Dominic Cruz to have evolved a ton over the past few years on the sidelines? I mean, I know he's a smart guy, but I don't know. I don't necessarily I don't buy that as the natural thing that's going to happen just because he's a smart guy. Like I don't necessarily buy it. I don't necessarily, like I say, I don't see anything in 1 minute of footage that tells me anything. There's nothing I want to depend on there. There's nothing I want to say like, oh well, I saw that minute, so I know. It's like no, I remember several years of Dominic Cruz fights where he was good, but more or less the same guy every time out, and that guy was hard to predict, hard to time, but he also won a lot of really narrow decisions. He was not dominant, you know. Even in his era, even with his funky style that people were catching up to and watching, he was not a unbelievably dominant champion. He was a guy that was edging out the elite fighters. He was Benson Henderson.
Mm-hmm. Can I share a quote that I just got from Sandon Bull on my Facebook page?
Absolutely.
He said, "I think a good way to sum up the styles of these two fighters is Cruz confuses his opponents because they don't know where he is when they try to hit him. Dillashaw confuses opponents because they don't know where he is when he's hitting them." I think that's a really good way to sum up this fight.
Yes, that is absolutely it.
Yeah.
And in that situation, I gotta trust Dillashaw because the question then is Cruz going to be able to figure out where Dillashaw is when Dillashaw is trying to hit him? And I don't think he is. I've never seen anything from Dominic Cruz that suggests when he's getting hit, he has a great sense of what exactly his opponent is doing. I see somebody who has learned a lot of very good, tricky, awkward, and consistent footwork and escapes. You know?
Mm-hmm.
But when he gets hit, it's not like he's coming in on a straight line and his opponent throws a strike that's going to hit him, and he's not like, oh yes, I know exactly what this is. I'm going to slip it. He gets hit, and then he slips out on a good angle.
Yeah, right. Like it's rote because everything is preemptive. Like everything for Dominic
Yeah,
Cruz, I think, is patterns,
exactly.
and that's why I think people say, "Oh, well, I think he's smarter than Dillashaw. He's got better fight IQ." Like in a sense, probably it definitely seems smarter than Dillashaw, but to an extent, fighting isn't about being smart. It's about having good feel. I
Yeah,
think TJ Dillashaw has great feel. He's got the athletic sense where like he's more like Roy Jones than he is like Gene Tunney. You know, like he's not
mhm.
this book learned type person, but he's smart in terms of fighting. He knows when to do things. He feels when to do things. He's a much better improviser than Dominic Cruz.
Yeah, and I think in that way to me, Dominic Cruz is a lot like Carlos Condit, where he's kind of a flowchart fighter.
Yeah.
Like it's like okay, I went through this section of the flowchart, and that leads me to this, and that leads me to this, and it looks incredibly complex, and it looks like they're thinking on the fly,
But
when
it's very
really like
systematic.
you watch Carlos Condit spar and hit mitts, and you can see he's like working on all these different combinations on rote, and it's not like it's not that it's not that it's uncreative, but it's like he's learning how to
Yeah.
build this flow system that looks more creative because it's incredibly complicated.
And it suits certain mentalities better than others. And
Yeah.
I think Cruz is probably the best iteration of a rote fighter or of a fighter who
Hmm.
is entirely system based. And I think all fighters benefit from having a system, but certain fighters like Dillashaw feel free to completely improvise within the system. Others are more locked to the scripted progressions. And I think Cruz is part of the latter group.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, Dominic Cruz is the underdog plus 128 down to plus 110. TJ Dillashaw is the favorite minus 135 up to minus 150. I honestly think that Dillashaw should be a much bigger favorite. Um,
I
and
think
I think a lot
Dillashaw's
of
a
this is
good bet
what
at those odds. I think Dillashaw's a good bet at those odds.
I do too. I think that Dominic Cruz's betting line is being driven by a fan base that the dude did not have when he was champ.
No, it's a fan base that loves to be contrarian, that really loves underdogs
Yep.
and comeback stories. If Cruz wins, fucking amazing comeback story.
Oh yeah.
And I
Shit. If
would,
Cruz wins, I will be shocked.
Yeah, and I would love to be that shocked. Like with
Yep.
Holm and Ronda, like I would love to be surprised by a Cruz win, but from an analytical perspective, it's really hard to see it.
Yeah, it really is. I don't understand it from an analytical perspective. It's one of those things that kind of drives you crazy because it's a narrative that it just is like it feels kind of like worth totally dismissing.
Yeah, and yeah, kind of in a way, and it's tough because it's Dominic Cruz. Like Dominic Cruz is
Yeah,
really good, and
yeah,
he kind of ran roughshod over this division in his day. It's a different division now, and he's you have to analyze it from a style matchup as best you can. The evidence to go on is spotty at best for Cruz, and Dillashaw's just been performing well and is a knockout machine now. Like he's got a
yeah,
great knockout percentage since his resurgence in 2012, and that seems to only be getting better as he continues to have 5-round fights, two championship round finishes in his 3 title fights so far. I expect to see more of that from him.
yeah. It's also worth noting that Dillashaw was a much better college wrestler than Dominic Cruz. Too. I don't even think Dominic Cruz went to
Dominic
college.
Cruz has great blending of his wrestling. He's a really good
He does.
transitional fighter. He's
He
got all these little
does.
traps. But yeah, it's hard to see Dillashaw being dominated in the wrestling game, and I really do think Cruz has to be dominant in the wrestling to win this fight.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's what I mean. Is that Dominic Cruz is a phenomenal wrestler for MMA. He blends it like better than almost anyone at that Frankie Edgar level, basically. Um, but it's not like so he's got a huge advantage over Dillashaw. It's like no, Dillashaw was a much better wrestler than Cruz coming like
And
amateurly.
has been a phenomenal wrestler throughout his MMA career as well.
Yeah. So, all right. On that note, we got to close the show. We ran way over time, but this was a fun one. Uh, this is at D Zane Simon. You can find me on Twitter at D Zane Simon. This is Zane Simon. It's Connor Rubish. You can find him on Twitter at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. You can find us on Bloody Elbow. Give this video a like. That's a thumbs up. Subscribe to MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM. And read us, see more videos, all that good shit. We got to go. Thanks, everyone.